Hey guys, what is up? My name is Brienne and welcome back to my channel, Books with Brie. Today I will be talking through my TBR for this year's reading rush. Alright, so the first prompt for this year's reading rush is read a book that matches your birthstone. And since I was born in February, my birthstone is an amethyst. So for any book on my bookshelf that was the color purple, I did not have as many as I thought I did, but I chose to read Zenith from the Andromeda series by Sasha Alsberg and Lindsay Cummings. Sasha Alsberg is one of my all-time favorite booktubers. Actually, she is one of the booktubers that inspired me to start my channel, and this book follows an all-girl crew on the Marauder, a ship, and it's supposed to have a ruthless ruler in it, and I don't actually know much about it because I like going into books blind. That's what I can tell. It seems to be a mix between sci-fi, like it's in space of course with all that science, but it has the tropes of YA fantasy where it comes with starting a revolution and changing how things are done. And I'm actually kind of excited to see how that's done in this book, especially because I've been waiting for Sasha's new book that she's just keeping under the name of Project Red at the moment. So the second prompt for this year's reading rush is actually very simple and actually really easy, and I had so many options, and it was read a book that's title starts with the word the. And since I actually read The Cruel Prince earlier this year and I finally picked up The Wicked King, so I have a physical copy of it with me, I decided for this one I will be reading The Wicked King by Holly Black, which is the second book in her, I think it's in the Cruel Prince series. I cannot remember the name of the trilogy itself, but I absolutely love the first book, even though it kind of made my head hurt because I was not used to stories that are directly about the fair folk. And I think the books themselves have amazing character development and plot is amazing. And so the first book basically follows the main character Jude and her two other sisters. One younger and her older sister is half Fae, and they're living with her older sister's father because when they were younger he came and wanted his daughter and his wife, which is her older sister, their mom, and their parents fought back and he ended up killing the two parents, so it's just Jude trying to survive in the land of Fae. And by the end of it, I loved it, and I love the romance in this book too, so I'm excited to see where it goes in this one because the Prince Cardin, he is supposed to be fighting her tooth and nail on everything, and I can't wait to see how that goes. The third prompt of this year's reading rush is actually a reverse of something that they usually do. They usually have the prompt where you read a book and then watch the movie adaptation. This year the prompt is actually flip-flopped, so you're going to be reading a book based on a movie that you've seen. Like you've seen the movie and now you want to read the book. And I've actually had this book since before the movie came out, but I did not have the chance to read it before it came out and before I went to see it with one of my old friends, and that movie was Love, Simon, so I will be reading Simon versus Homo sapien agenda. I think it's a really good coming out story and it has a whole bunch of representation that I'm totally here for. I'm in for an emotional roller coaster, I know that for a fact. I think this is gonna be more of an emotional roller coaster for me than The Fault in Our Stars was, because that's one of the first books that really made me cry. It's basically Simon dealing with the fact that he's come to the realization that he is not straight, that he is into men, and he's trying to cope with that and figure out who this other person is who came out anonymously at his school. Because he's made a really strong connection with them, and his secret of who he is as a person and who he likes as a person, like him being gay comes out eventually, not by his choice, and so he's faced with that and dealing with how it changes himself, his friend group, how he interacts with people, and how it affects him and his family, and how his family reacts. And I'm really excited to see that because there is not enough queer representation in literature today, and I'm so excited to be reading this. Alright, for the next prompts, I'm going to be jumping around a little bit because I would like to get the prompts out of the way where I actually have the physical copies of the books, because the last two I'm going to talk about are audiobooks, but that is for a little bit later. The next prompt I'm going to talk about is the one where you're supposed to read a book that takes place on a different continent than you live on. And since I live in the US, it's a little more difficult for me to find books that take place on different continents that I haven't already read. And I'm trying to not reread so many books during this because I've already reread so many this year. And so for this one, I decided to read My Oxford Year by Julia Wellen. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So all I can really say that I know about this book is that it follows an American student as she spends a year at Oxford University. She's 24 and her first day there ends up getting ruined because a local with his car ends up ruining her shirt, and it's not very polite to her, and she quickly finds out that he is actually her English professor, Mr. Davenport. And so she spends the year going through some internal struggles and realizing that Oxford might not be all that she planned it to be, because she had hyped it up her entire life since the age of 13 to now 24 as being her ultimate goal and her plan in life. So I'm curious to see where this one goes, considering the synopsis on the back hints towards some sort of relationship between the main character Julia and Mr. Davenport. Usually I'm not okay with that kind of relationship, but they are both older. She's not like an incoming freshman. The main character's 24. So I want to see how they do this and if they do this book correctly. The last prompt that I actually have a physical copy of the book to talk about for is the prompt, the first book that you touch. Now, I did do this one correctly. I stood in front of my bookcase with my eyes closed, and I kind of just reached out and like moved my hand around before touching a book, and then that is actually the book that I'm going to be talking about, and this is my only reread of the Reading Rush, and that is The Boy Who Sneaks in My Bedroom Window by Christy Mosley, yeah. So this sounds like a really, really weird book, but I have to say it's one of my favorites, especially because it was first published on Wattpad, and the author still publishes some of her works on Wattpad. So this one is actually more so the main character dealing with her feelings towards her older brother's best friend. The older brother's best friend dealing with his feelings for the main character, and the main character dealing with past traumas from her abusive father, and dealing with the fact that he's moved back into town. And as the relationship between the main character and her older brother's best friend grows, so does their feelings for each other, and it just starts to show that they can't hide it from each other anymore. But I would like to say the book does start out really heavy with when they were really young before their parents got divorced. So there is some trigger warnings for abuse and assault, because not only is the main character dealing with trauma from being physically abused, she's also dealing with trauma from being sexually abused. I think this book does a really good job with diving into that and not making it into something it's not, because there are a lot of times where when books talk about sexual assault and the trauma that comes with it. They don't talk about how it's not always strangers who cause that trauma. So I think this is a really good example of that kind of trauma, and I think it does a very good job with just showing how she deals with it as a teenager at 16. I would like to warn though that I believe this takes place in like the late 90s, early 2000s, just because of some of the styles and some of the slang. But I really enjoy the relationship between the main character and her older brother's best friend. Now these last two books I will be listening to, not only are they classics, they are also audiobooks, so I do not have a physical copy to show you guys and to hold up for you guys. So one of the prompts for them is read a book from a genre you would like to read more of, and that's where the classical part comes into. So for that, I decided to read A Tale of Two Cities, and I decided on this one not only because I found out that the audiobook was free on the Apple Books app, so it's a big factor in that, but it's also because in Cassandra Clare's The Infernal Devices series, that is one of both Tessa and Will's favorite books, and I would like a deeper understanding of that, and I kind of just want some of this classical romance that a lot of people hype up, and I did enjoy Pride and Prejudice, so I'm very curious to see if I will be enjoying A Tale of Two Cities as well. I am completely prepared to just not enjoy it, but I am completely prepared as well to enjoy it immensely. I don't know how I would feel if I just am okay with it. I don't usually end up just okay with books, so I'm excited to see where I land with this, and I'm excited to see how the love triangle from this extremely old classic turns out. And the only thing I remember actually about it is the character Sydney Carton that is mentioned quite a bit in The Infernal Devices, but I want to see if Sydney Carton is a favorite of mine or if it's the other love interest. So this final prompt is actually the only one I seem to have an issue with, especially because we're in the middle of a global pandemic. But the prompt itself is read a book completely outside your house. And I know not everyone is lucky enough to have like a backyard they can go to or be able to go out in their front yard and just read, and it does not make sense to go to a coffee shop in the middle of a global pandemic to read. It's not a very smart idea. Please don't do that. Please stay inside, please stay safe, and sanitize if you do go out. But for this prompt, I was lucky enough to be able to sit out in my backyard and I can read out there. And for this one, it is also an audiobook as well, and it is actually classic as well, but it is going to be The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. I've heard a lot about this, and I don't really know if I will enjoy it, but the audiobook, again, was free on Apple Books, and so I want to see if I'll enjoy it, and it's only about 2-ish hours of an audiobook at most, and I'm very curious to see the horror element that has been mentioned to me about it. Again, I don't know much about The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and anything about the plot or the story behind it, and I'm kind of curious to see because I avoided like the comic books and all the retellings of Sleepy Hollow when I was younger, because it was always in my library, always at school, and I just never found an interest in it, and now I'm kind of excited to see how I feel about this one. Hey guys, that was it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and please do not forget to like and subscribe, and let me know down in the comment section below what books you would read for some of these prompts, and let's see if we can come up with an alternative prompt for the read a book entirely outside your house. Let me know those down in the comments. I'm very curious to see what we're able to come up with and what we're able to do with that.